I'm going to talk today a little bit about indecisiveness and anxiety. Now, I am definitely an indecisive person. I probably always have been, but that indecisiveness has definitely got a lot worse since I started to suffer with anxiety. And I want to talk a little bit about why you can become quite indecisive when you're anxious, what to look out for in other people if they're maybe starting to struggle with anxiety, and maybe just to try and be a bit more understanding of why someone might be really indecisive. It can be frustrating. I know that my friends and my family get very frustrated at my inability sometimes to make a decision, but sometimes for me those decisions genuinely feel like the end of the world, and that's quite a hard concept to explain. For me, like I said, things definitely get worse when my anxiety gets worse. I put a lot of pressure on myself to make the right decision. I don't want to do anything wrong. I feel like I'll be a bad person if I make the wrong decision. I start worrying about all the consequences of the decision that I make. And at first, this was some of the slightly bigger decisions I really struggled with. I always needed a lot of help and advice. I would ring my mum a lot to try and get her opinion, try and get her to almost make the decision for me, because I'd get so overwhelmed. These could be especially like big decisions around maybe, say, spending a lot of money, buying a car, buying a piece of furniture for the house. That's when, when I first started suffering with mental health issues, like I noticed that I was, I get really upset when I had big decisions to make. I definitely started relying on my mum a lot more to make those decisions, which then I started to beat myself up because I was like, well, I'm a grown woman. I obviously was in my 20s at this point, but still I was like, I'd been to university, I'd left university, and now I couldn't make a decision about what to buy, what to use my money for. And then it kind of started to escalate. It wasn't those big decisions anymore, then some of the smaller decisions. Things that I felt like had big repercussions. So, what social event to go to. So say, for example, there's two things happening on the same night, trying to make a decision of what to do. I mean, I would go into a full-on meltdown. I'd have panic attacks, I'd be crying, I'd be hysterical, I wasn't able to calm myself down, and I could not make that decision, because what if I made the wrong decision? What if I went to one event and I missed out on something in the other event and I regretted it for the rest of my life? Or what if I went to the one event and something really bad happened and then I regretted that for the rest of my life because something bad had happened? And I would escalate these scenarios in my head to a point where I couldn't make the decision, and it would be awful, like absolutely truly awful. Like I can't even describe like the panic, the fear that would be going on in my head and how I was feeling. I couldn't stop crying. Eventually a decision would be made, or sometimes no decision. Eventually I'd miss both because I was trying to make the decision, which then would send me off in another spiral, because now I haven't made a decision. Now it's the end of the world because I'm an awful person, because I can't make a decision, because I've now missed out on things, because I'm unable to be an adult. So on and so on. It was a constant vicious cycle, and every time I would use it as a way to beat myself up. And then it got worse and worse, and it started off, like I said, big things, money, if I was spending large amounts of money, then social events, then it was what to wear, and I would start panicking about, I didn't know what to wear, was it the right thing, what if I didn't look right, what if I got too hot, what if I got too cold. I would start taking multiple layers or outfits to change into in my bag. I would often get mocked by my friends and my family because it was like, why have you come out with a second pair of, pants, or what, like trousers? Why have you come out with a dress? You know, and I couldn't explain, because what if I got too hot? What if the decision I've made this morning was the wrong decision? I get too hot and then I don't know how to cope. And I know it sounds so stupid. It is, you just get hot. There's no big deal. But to me, it honestly felt like the end of the world decision. And I couldn't cope. So the only way I could cope was by like having options for everything, because then I haven't made a wrong decision. Then nothing bad could happen. Then I couldn't feel bad about myself. So that's what I would do. I would over prepare for everything. I remember we went camping once in the height of my depression and anxiety, and my car was so full that we barely could get the other passengers in. And everyone thought it was really funny, you know, and I made a joke of it and I laughed it off, because it, you know, to anyone else, well, of course it'd be funny. Who turns up with every single item you could possibly need ever? Me. Why? Because I couldn't cope with the thought that I might do something wrong, that I might have forgotten something I need, that I might not be prepared for the worst thing that could happen. And I couldn't see that maybe it would be okay. And you know what? Maybe it would be okay if I'd forgotten the tin opener. Maybe it would be okay if I didn't have quite the right clothing. But I couldn't see at the time, because all I could see was fear and panic and how I was awful. If I made the wrong decision, I was an awful person. And it stops you from being able to breathe. It stops you from being able to live. It's consuming. And it got worse. I didn't know what to eat. So some days I didn't eat because I couldn't make a decision. Because I became obsessed with what if I wasted calories on something that I didn't enjoy? What if I wasted money on buying a meal out that I didn't like? You know, it's so easy for other people to say to me, it doesn't matter, it's just money, just forget about it. God, it's just calories, don't worry about it. You know, you can be good later, you can do some exercise, whatever it was, you know, that people used to say to me to try and make me sort of feel better. It all sounds really logical, doesn't it? Anxiety, depression, mental illnesses are not logical. I can't stress that enough, and I know I've said it before in these videos, but they are not logical. You can't always have a rational conversation with that person. I know that I'm not rational at certain points when my anxiety takes over. And there were times when I became so irrational that I just couldn't make any decisions. So I just didn't want to get out of bed, because it was easier to stay asleep than to have to deal with the guilt, the worry, the anxiety, the shame, the embarrassment, the hatred of myself that would go on for the whole of that day. Every time I had to make even the smallest decision. And I know it can be really frustrating. I know that you want to strangle the person that sat at the table in a restaurant that still hasn't decided what to order when the waitress comes. That you get frustrated when someone's tried on the 15th outfit before a night out and still can't decide what to wear. I get that it's really, really frustrating. But I'd also really ask you all to be patient with those people that are indecisive. Maybe they don't have extreme anxiety like I do, but they might have some anxiety around maybe that particular event, or maybe that particular decision. And whether it's a small amount of anxiety that's normal, or whether it is an anxiety issue, a mental health issue, none of it is very nice. And if you see someone struggling more and more and more with decisions, if you see someone that maybe is becoming more indecisive than they used to be, Maybe ask them how they're doing, check in on them, because it could be a sign that they're starting to struggle. Try and be patient with them, and I know that can be hard, especially when it's all the time, but just try and understand that there might be something else bigger than just that little decision, and that when you try and talk logically to them about that decision, maybe they don't, it doesn't affect anything, maybe they can't see that rational, and that might be just because of their anxiety's taken over, and so they can't see those reasonable arguments. Now, I've started to get a lot better. I've mentioned a couple of times now that I'm having therapy, and it's definitely helping. I've tried a number of different things over the years. One thing, when I first started having counselling a couple of years ago, this was with a different group. One thing that they got me to do was to just make a decision, and like a small one that, you know, we talked about before, and maybe we'd say, you know, actually it's not the end of the world, nothing's bad's going to happen, it might not be ideal, you might lose some money, you might, you know, not enjoy your food, whatever it is, but pick that small decision and then make it. And, you know, if it's the wrong one, does it matter? And then there were times when I tried things and I actually purposely made the wrong decision. So I had a real thing about my outfit had to be perfect at one point. And my counsellor at the time made me go for a week without putting any jewellery on. And that for me was really anxiety inducing, because I didn't feel like my outfit was perfect. I hadn't made that, you know, it wasn't the right decision to wear that outfit without that piece of jewellery, or to wear, she would sometimes make me wear the wrong shoes, you know, and it was awful. Like, it was absolutely awful at the time, but gradually I saw that there was no bad thing happening, and I started to feel a bit more comfortable with making wrong decisions. I'm working a lot on not beating myself up, and realising that, you know, I know it's cliche, you know, you learn from your mistakes, but I felt like the only way I could learn from my mistakes is if I beat myself up continuously after I made them. So sometimes it was easier not to make a mistake, because then I knew that the stress of beating myself up afterwards wasn't going to happen. And I'm really working on learning to accept that mistakes do happen, and that a mistake doesn't make you a bad person. And sometimes I do that by looking at, you know, other people, maybe people I admire, people I care about, sometimes famous people, and looking to see if they've made mistakes in their lives. And, you know, realising that I don't think they're an awful person, that I don't hate them, they just made a mistake, and that's okay. I started to realise that maybe I didn't need to hate myself quite so much. It takes time, and it's not easy. You don't just snap out of things. You don't just suddenly go, oh, brilliant, I can make decisions again. And it's definitely something that I personally needed therapy with, but as my anxiety is reducing, I'm definitely finding it easier. However, during the lockdown, I'd say that some of those issues around decision making have definitely come back to the surface. You know, having decisions that have a lot more weight. So making a decision about whether you go to the shops, or whether you see a friend, or whether you go to the pubs when they reopen, they suddenly have a lot more meaning to them. You know, you could catch the virus, you could spread the virus, you could give it to someone you love, you could give it to someone you don't know but still could end up dying. There's a lot more weight, so I become a lot more anxious about those decisions. And that's starting to filter into some of the smaller decisions again. But this time I've become aware of it, and I'm trying to understand it and sit with it and accept it, rather than beating myself up. And I'm also, the one thing I try and do now is I try not to get other people to make those decisions for me. It's really easy when you're indecisive because of anxiety, to ask someone else to make those decisions. So you put the onus of making that decision on someone else. So you can't beat yourself up. If they make the wrong decision, that's not your fault, that's their fault. And I'm trying not to do that, because that is not fair on the people I love either, because that's a lot of pressure on them to always have to make all of my decisions. And because they were making all of my decisions, I felt lost. I felt like I didn't know who I was. I ended up doing things maybe that weren't really me, because I'd asked someone else to make those decisions for me. And feeling lost is awful. And it's definitely taking me a long time to try and find who I am again and what I like. And the only way you can decide if you like something is by making a decision. So it's not an easy journey, but it's one that I'm starting to get better at. So I just kind of want to share this because I don't, again, I'm not sure if people really understand how anxiety can kind of really affect those decisions, and how to someone that decision might seem so pointless and like, why are you stressing about it? But to someone with anxiety, it, honest to God, is like the end of the world. So as always, I just really encourage you to be patient with everyone around you, because you just don't know what people are going through sometimes. Thanks.